So this is going to be our first panelist, and this is going to be actually a panel really targeting preprints and peer review. And we have the really the pleasure of having two really great individuals, John Inlgis, who is the co-founder of Bioarchive, and Ludo, who is Ludo Waltman, who is part of ASAP Bio, and also just generally kind of an OG in the open science field. So we'll bring up our panelists here, and then also some of our hosts, which will be Johnny and Pat.
Okay, great. Yeah, great to see everybody. This has been awesome so far. Thank you, Shadi. This is a great first talk, kicking things off. Yeah, perfect.
Great. Hi, nice to see you, everyone. So now that we are all together here, let me kick this off by first introducing each of the speakers, and then we go into the questions and explore the topics of preprints and peer review. So, John, you were the last to come, so why don't we start with introducing you? So yes, John Inlgis, he is the executive director of the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory Press. And he started off his career as an editor at the Lancet, the famous medical journal. And from there, he was recruited. Oh, no, actually, no, he first started another journal, but then he was recruited by James Watson, the legendary inventor of the DNA structure, and to like become this founder of the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory Press, which now has a long history. Patrick just told me that it was started before he was even born. And then he built a team there of like 50 people. And later on, in 2013, he started BioArchive, and let's say the sister of that, or the brother of that, medRxiv, in 2019. So we are very happy to have you here, John. Yeah, a long history in publishing in different ways than physical and digital form. So great set of expertise.
Very glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you for coming. Then let's move on to you, Ludo. Ludo is the professor of quantitative science studies and the deputy director of the Center for Science and Technology Studies, by the way, in the city of Leiden. That's also where I am right now, in the library of that same city where Ludo is the professor. He is a meta-scientist, as the name already gave away, professor of quantitative science. So he quantifies the scientific process itself, and he is known for the VOS viewer, a software tool which kind of visualizes bibliometrics, so you can see the relationships between papers, who cited whom, and journals, and many more things. It's quite complex, and Ludo manages to like visualize that. He is also the founding editor-in-chief of a journal in the same domain, and it's called Quantitative Science Studies. And as this, he also has a large background in publishing, knowing what that entails, and the peer review process that goes into that. And today, he is also known for his efforts in open peer review. He told me, for example, how he is publishing a lot of his reviews openly, just on its own initiative. And we brought him in to speak about that. Then, thank you, Ludo, for being here.
My pleasure, Jonathan. Thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here.
And then we have Patrick. Patrick fits into this panel as the co-founder of ResearchHub, where we are also working on new forms of publishing. He is a medical student and a PhD student, but he dropped out to pursue his career in tech together with Brian Armstrong from Coinbase. He founded ResearchHub, and today he'll be here to represent the decentralized science side of this panel. I'm really happy to be able to host this and speak to all of you guys, a nice set of experts from different domains, and hopefully we can enlighten our audience and each other to the different ways in which science can be published, will be published, and yeah, shape that together. So if anyone wants to say something, I'll give you a minute. Otherwise, I would just go and ask the questions and direct them.
I'd just like to say thank you, Jonathan, for putting this together. John, I've been like a gigantic fan of BioArchive pretty much since you all started, was when I was starting my PhD in molecular biology. So I just feel extremely lucky to be able to like have you here and like teach us about your experience. So thank you. And then Ludo, obviously your presentation last year was incredible. So thank you again for taking the time to join us.
A pleasure.
Nice. Yes. Thank you, Patrick. So yeah, I think one thing to start us off with is like the early days of BioArchive would be a very interesting topic. Like what drove you to make it, and how did it look like, and what was maybe the watershed moment where it really gained traction?
Well, thank you. I could talk about that for an hour, but let me be brief. So I'm based at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, which many of you may already know is a research institute that's 30 miles outside New York City on the North Shore of Long Island. It's 130 years old. And for really all of that time, it has been a place where people came physically to share science. The first group to congregate here on the banks of Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory was students from the Brooklyn Academy of Arts and Sciences who came to learn Darwin's principles in the field. That was in 1890. And then gradually a research staff was acquired and educational activities grew. And by the time I got here in 1987, it was really a very well-established hub for the sharing of scientific information in a whole variety of different ways. So we, of course, were aware once Archive started, Archive, of course, the preprint server for physics and mathematics primarily, once it got started, we were very aware of that and curious about what would happen if something similar were tried in biomedicine. And of course, given the entrepreneurial nature of biomedical publishers, it wasn't long before that was tried, and it didn't work. It was tried by Nature, it was tried by BMJ and others. But by the time 2013 rolled around, Richard and I, my colleague Richard Sever and I had the feeling that the Human Genome Project had changed everything. That was a community of scientists who actually came to Cold Spring Harbor every year, had a big meeting, shared everything, shared code, shared ideas, shared findings. And of course, this was mostly scientists who were involved in the public genome sequencing project. They were in a competitive race with private enterprise. And the fact that they shared so successfully seemed to us to be a hint that a preprint server, even if it was only for genomics, would be valuable. But we thought there was this very strong chance that it might be valuable across all of biomedical disciplines. So I went to the president of the laboratory, got his approval to start BioArchive with no argument or conversation at all, and of course, no extra investment. So we just started, and it grew and grew and continued to grow. And we got buy-in from all kinds of areas of the biomedical community, from journal publishers, from prominent scientists who lent us our support. And so it really has been a community-based enterprise right from the beginning, but it's rooted in the idea that Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory has always been a sharing hub for science throughout its history, and this was just doing it in the digital age.
All right, thank you very much. So the watershed moment in a way was when the Human Genomes Project came together. You could see that.
Yes, I think so. I mean, it's hard to put your finger on, a specific moment, but because if you look at the graph of uptake and deposition of manuscripts, it's pretty smooth. All of these things take a while to percolate, and then you suddenly get a sense you've reached some kind of critical mass where the growth level becomes much more sort of exponential. And we certainly saw that in the growth of biomedicine, the growth of bioarchive. MedArchive, on the other hand, had a very different history and was profoundly influenced by the pandemic, but that's a whole other story.
Okay. Maybe we can get back to that. For now, I would like to direct it to you, Ludo, because something that John mentioned here is like, it was tried and then it didn't work at first, right? So here we have this thing that it seems to be not so easy to share all the information openly. And that's really something that you have investigated and have a lot of information on. So can you maybe talk a little bit about the challenges that still kind of seem to be in the way there? And one thing that comes to mind is also that some people feel maybe hesitant to share preprints and share their reviews openly. Maybe you could address these concerns and yeah, speak to those people. And
yeah, no, happy to do that, Jonathan. But I first want to say that I really find it impressive what John has actually managed to do. I didn't know the full history that he just shared with us. It's really fascinating and impressive. This is, of course, really making a difference in kind of how at least in the life sciences, how research is shared, is disseminated. It's hugely important. So compared to that, I think my own contribution to all of this is modest. But anyway, I indeed, being a researcher that is kind of interested in kind of understanding why certain ideas that at least in theory seem to make a lot of sense, why they sometimes work, but sometimes don't work. That's indeed something that I'm trying to understand better. One thing that I recently did, and that I could perhaps briefly share, is looking at this whole preprint development that we have globally in some sense, or to some extent, but also of course across disciplines. What we see is a lot of progress, and we can show all kinds of impressive graphs with an annual increase each year in how many preprints there are. But actually what we also see is that still, after so many years of having preprint service like archive and bioarchive, we are actually still at a very limited share of all articles that are being preprinted. And that indeed raises this question, like, why isn't this happening at a larger scale? I did a survey, a global survey of researchers in all disciplines in all countries. We got quite a lot of responses, actually. So these researchers that we asked to kind of share their experiences with preprinting, these researchers are corresponding authors of articles in journals. And some of these articles, of course, they also appeared as a preprint, others didn't. And we asked all these authors, what we in particular asked them to share with us is, what are the obstacles for you? So why perhaps didn't you choose to preprint your work? And what we saw, what was very clear in this survey is concerns that researchers have about the reliability, the credibility of research that is shared through preprint. So the idea, like, this has not been peer-reviewed yet, so there might be all kinds of mistakes or flaws in the research, and that might be risky. This was basically the most prominent concern that researchers shared, in particular, by the way, in the life and health sciences. And also, it was mentioned in particular by US researchers, which I found interesting. This was the biggest concern. But I also found, by the way, is that in China, researchers have kind of a different perspective on this. In China, researchers really told us systematically that they are concerned about the lack of recognition for preprints. So what seems to be the case is that in China, even more than in other parts of the world, publishing is critical, is crucial to kind of make progress in your career. And publishing in the form of preprinting is apparently something that is not being rewarded, especially in China. So these were some of the highlights of what we found in that study.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Here I see these two concerns being mentioned. Like, the one is like the reliability of the information. So the value of that in itself, and like being skeptical of this, and then the other, the recognition. So to a person who might consider writing a preprint and publishing it, but might have some concerns, for example, about the recognition, what would you answer to them? Ludo?
Yeah, my suggestion would be, well, first of all, I think we need to acknowledge that indeed there are problems in the way researchers are being rewarded for the things they do, and the whole credit system, the way researchers are being evaluated, all of that. There are lots of problems, or let's say challenges, that we are facing, and we need to change things. But of course, many researchers just face a system that they themselves cannot change. So for them, it just represents the way things are. And then I would basically say, preprinting is essentially something that you can do for free. You can still publish your articles in journals. If you are expected to publish in high impact, prominent, reputable journals, you can still do all of that. But in addition, you can preprint your work. That has changed over time. In the past, of course, there was quite a lot of journals that made clear that they didn't appreciate the whole idea of preprinting. And then there was a really major obstacle for researchers, but this has changed over time. So now for most journals, preprinting is seen as something that is considered acceptable, or journals even encourage it, which is of course even better. So partly I think that this whole recognition thing is it reflects indeed all kinds of problems we have in the system, but at the same time, it's also perhaps more a perception that researchers have than a reality.
Yeah, I would very much endorse what Ludo said. Things are changing, but they're changing differentially. I mean, as far as we can see, there are still parts of the world where the idea of posting a preprint is perceived as not the correct thing to do. We have been quite used to intervening in individual cases with on behalf of authors who have posted a preprint on BioArchive, say, and then found that a journal in their particular part of the world is resistant to accepting it because there is a preprint version. This is a perception that's changing, I think, but certainly closer to the beginning of BioArchive, it was not uncommon for us to have to intervene with journal editors to explain what we were trying to do. But much less of a problem now. But there are still some pockets of resistance in certain parts of the world and in medicine in certain disciplines.
Okay.
This might be a little reductionist, but John, you mentioned like even sort of the motivation for the human genome project being a little more open was competition with industry and potentially getting to the publication first. And like, correct me if I'm wrong there, that's definitely an assumption on my part. It reminds me though of like a really like big success story from like my own personal experience with BioArchive, where I had a friend who's in their 5th year of a molecular biology PhD, and they were trying to get published in a journal. They couldn't get published, had a couple of rejections, were frustrated because they thought it was a good paper. They posted it on BioArchive, tweeted about it. Some of their colleagues like read it on BioArchive and was like, wow, this is great. This needs to be published. And so then eLife, on recommendation from the colleagues, published the paper. This person graduated and has a great job now. And so that was like very much due to BioArchive. And so, yeah, I think like something that like I hope we can contribute to sort of the environment here is like some marketing efforts to help to like correct maybe some of the assumptions that exist around like preprints. Because yeah, at least like tangibly what I've experienced in my own life, they've been like a huge help to people who just want to get their work out there in a more transparent fashion. So thank you very much for all of your work. Well,
thank you, Patrick. That's kind of you to mention that, and we've had that fortunate story told to us many times. I mean, we all know about the lengthy delays that can happen in the conventional publishing system. The value of a preprint server is that it provides evidence of productivity that can be evaluated by anyone who is moving along their career path. I'm sorry, can be offered up by anyone who's moving along their career path to a prospective employer. And I mean, we feel very strongly that a preprint server is not by itself enough. It's not, you know, the distribution of work is a great thing and should absolutely be done, but there is a very necessary evaluation and assessment step that goes into that afterwards. But the process of closed peer review, where someone is prevented from sharing work for a lengthy period of time while peer review processes are conducted, seems completely inappropriate to the age that we live in and the sociology of the enterprise that we're all collectively involved in.
Could I John, could I ask you something about this? Because I think what you're saying is really interesting. You're saying indeed, preprints is very important, but it should not be the only thing. We still need that evaluation of the scientific work, peer review, etc. I wonder, when you say that, do you mean that all scientific work that at some point appears as a preprint should indeed subsequently go through some form of evaluation, peer review, etc.? Or could it be perhaps a distinction where some works indeed definitely need this, while other works that perhaps make different types of contributions might actually not need any immediate peer review?
No, when I said peer review, Ludo, I meant, you know, conventional journalesque peer review, and a lot of that does go on with preprints that are posted on preprint servers. But no, I think the value of sharing work openly in the way that preprint servers allow is that different forms of assessment and reaction can be applied to a particular piece of work. And something, I mean, we are now finding out 10 years into BioArchive that there is a community of, you know, confident PIs who basically say, posting a preprint is as much as I'm prepared to do because, you know, what I want to do is share my work and move on. And it's not as important to me to get yet another peer-reviewed publication in the journal. Now that, of course, avoids the issue of the young people who may be associated with that career, with that paper, who are on a career path where peer review and journal publication is important. But my point is that one can derive from a preprint all kinds of information, whether or not it has been peer reviewed or otherwise. And as a professional in science, you look at the literature in your field and you may pick up the fact that, you know, a change in a dosage or adjustment of incubation conditions or something of that sort may make a difference to the work that you're doing. So there are all kinds of ways of digesting and learning from the scientific literature.
Yeah, I think it's nice the way indeed, John, you now kind of you present your perspective on this. I think in some sense what you're saying is that preprinting offers a way to have much more variety, much more heterogeneity in the way we kind of communicate about scientific work, and we respond, evaluate each other's work, while the traditional journal peer review process is, of course, a one-size-fits-all solution. We are kind of trying to do the same thing for all research produced globally in all disciplines. And I think indeed, I can only agree, preprints really bring an important advantage here in offering much more flexibility in how we think about communicating about scholarly knowledge.
And of course, journals are also adapting, maybe not as fast as we might like, but they are. And I suppose in the vanguard of that adaptation is eLife, which now exists as a mechanism for concentrating, acquiring and concentrating community reaction to work that has been communicated to the community. And they are moving away from accept, reject, conventional journal-like decisions. So far, they're, as far as I know anyway, the only group that is attempting to do that. But the rationale for that is that this process of acceptance and rejection is a sort of artificial distinction that doesn't reflect the way that science advances. That science advances incrementally, and the sharing of that new knowledge and those advances has been done in many different contexts, informally at conferences and so on, and that a preprint server can represent in a digital world many of sort of human interactions that people have with corpuses of knowledge. And the journals, they don't get me wrong, they still have a very important critical role in the life and careers of scientists, and that's not going to change anytime very soon. But the monolithic nature of journals is changing, and eLife, as I say, is just one example of a journal that's trying to do things differently and with apparent success.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning eLife. We also try to get Michael, actually, head of eLife, to here, because, like you say, they are on the vanguard. Fortunately, he didn't respond to my emails. But this brings us to another issue, because now if we have science completely out in the open and we basically distinguish it, like we change it live, then the question is, one thing that a journal kind of used to do is distinguish between what is science and what is pseudoscience, or at least what is appreciated like this by the general public. How do you see this issue and the role of peer review in that? Because it seems that to some degree, the scientific consensus between a group of scientists is what is guiding the distinction between science and pseudoscience. So anyone here would like to speak to that?
Ludo, you take that. You've heard enough from me.
Well, I could say something about this. Essentially, Professor Jonathan, this relates to that concern that these people in my survey that they expressed. They said, I'm concerned about preprinting, or people around me are concerned about preprinting, because it's kind of unclear whether the research is sound, is solid. And that is true, of course. So that in that sense, factually, that objection is correct. The way I look at it is that the same basically also applies to research in peer-reviewed journals. There, of course, we have a certain quality assurance process. But first of all, that quality assurance process is non-transparent. So we don't really know kind of what is happening, or we need to kind of just trust or believe what a journal editor tells us they are doing. And also, we have now learned, especially over the past 5 years or so, we have learned that actually there are quite a lot of journals that, let's say, don't really fulfill the promises they make. Recently, we had all the retractions, for instance, at the Hindawi journals. So you could perhaps reverse the concern that was expressed by these respondents in my survey. You could actually turn it around, and you could say, shouldn't we be equally concerned or even more concerned about kind of selling research as if it has been gone through a rigorous quality assurance process, while that is actually not the case? I would probably argue that that is actually more dangerous than just being kind of clear about the fact that something is just a preprint and hasn't gone through in-depth peer review.
Now you're speaking like sort of out of my heart, because I think the worst kind of pseudoscience is the one that actually looks a lot like a science. And Richard Feynman had this nice word, cargo cult science, which is like, yeah, it has a form of science. It looks like science, especially if you're not able to replicate it because you don't have maybe the funds or the scientific knowledge. So then it's actually quite dangerous to put a stamp of approval on something that is not actually qualitatively on the level. Maybe
even
yeah,
like John and Ludo mentioned, like there's all different kinds of evaluation, right? Like peer review is one kind, which is like, 2 or 3 experts in a closed room sharing an opinion. A replication is another kind. And so like eLife is doing where they're aggregating sort of this community perspective. It can consist of like people's like expert opinions, like layman opinions, and then like objective replications to help people like make sense out of whether something's science or pseudoscience. So yeah, I love kind of the transition towards like a more holistic review of like open access literature. And it feels like less of a gatekeeper, more of a you have to prove it if it's true kind of situation.
I think we also need better methods of conversation around scientific work, and we're limited, and those things happen in the real world. And you know, one of the things that has kept me at Cold Spring Harbor for a rather unexpected 30 years is the fact that so the sense of the community of science, gathering, you know, every week, different groups of 400 or 500 people coming here, in addition to the in-house scientific enterprise. But that sense of collective investment in a particular topic or a particular field is a really very powerful one. And you know, it's often been said that the bar at Cold Spring Harbor is where a lot of real scientific truth is exchanged, because you know, people are talking informally, not always on the record, and basically giving a very honest assessment of their own work as well as other people's. And so that kind of interaction, that kind of community engagement with the work that's done within the scientific enterprise, in a way, is what we are trying to aim for with these not-for-profit community-based preprint servers. Now, we're a long way from achieving that goal, and some of it is culture, some the reluctance of people to engage in that way. Some of it is technology. We don't, you know, our platforms are not terribly adaptable or very well geared to the kind of discourse that might take place around a given piece of research. But we're sort of trying to head in that direction because there are different ways of evaluating work. And then just the last point is, and eLife actually, I think, has a handle on this, that how the community perceives work changes over the course of time. And with the current journal-based literature, there's a sense that it goes out there and that's it, it's done. It may be cited, but nobody ever goes back to it in any kind of live, engaged way that has the capability of changing perception of that work that was reported. And I think we are now in an era with technologies that may allow more of that to happen, and work to sort of live and evolve in ways that we haven't had the opportunity to do before. And that's something I find very interesting.
Nice. Thank you. We have now really explored the two concerns that Ludo raised in the beginning. And now you mentioned that a lot of science actually happens at the bar. That's a good way to say it. It is in a conversation. It's not necessarily at the bar. I also read like a biography by Heisenberg where he just goes through all the significant conversations, and they range from a taxi to like a 4-day trip with Niels Bohr, hiking, right? That's going to be a little bit more in depth than what happens in the text. So this, I think, is a good bridge to like lead this over to Patrick, and maybe Patrick, you can talk a little bit about what you've been doing on ResearchHub and how that ties into what John just said about like trying to enable conversation and through technology.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, even just that comment about like discussion at a bar, it makes me think it's like an interesting kind of combination of like anonymity, it's like trusted pseudonymity kind of, and like how can you replicate that in like a open way in like the internet? You know, still lots to brainstorm on there, but yeah, I think with ResearchHub, we're trying to create like the UI that makes it easy for people to come in and share their opinion about scientific literature, you know, whether that's like a layman who wants to share kind of their gut feeling, or like an expert who has a lot of context, or another scientist who wants to share a replication. And then I think importantly too, like also making it like financially sustainable for this type of interaction to happen. So like in theory, like if you disagree, you know, with a certain finding that you see like on Bioarchive, you can bring your community together to maybe crowdfund an experiment to test it. you know, to have a replication to see like, you know, or I guess add additional context to the original work itself. So yeah, big picture, we're very lucky at ResearchHub to work with like a group of extremely talented engineers who can build up almost anything that we dream. So like, I feel very excited to have this conversation, to dig into like what that format actually looks like, because I don't think it's the easiest thing to replicate, like a conversation in a bar with a trusted friend on the internet. But if we could do that, it would, I think, unlock a lot. So yeah, that's sort of big picture what we're hoping to do.
Yeah. One thing that we have seen is, of course, Twitter being like a platform here, that kind of is a testament to the deep need that scientists feel to like discuss their work. While it's not clear to me that Twitter is the ideal platform for this, I feel like the character limit is part of that. But what I do like is, of course, the way that it spreads in your network, and that's sort of what you do want with the conversation. Maybe it would be interesting here to hear your vision on this, like both of you, Ludo and John, because we heard Patrick to say that they are building a software that allows that level of conversation. It would be really interesting to hear from a publisher with deep publishing expertise and from a scientist who's interested in this topic, how they would like this to look. And then maybe Patrick can feed that to his talented engineering team that can make dreams real. So who wants to go first?
Well, you go first, John.
There has always been tension, hasn't there, within the research community between the way that we interact as individuals and what it takes to advance in our careers. And publishing in journals has become the touchstone for career advancement. And contributions to discussions, all of that are minor considerations. Really, when in most academic organizations anyway, academic institutions, people get jobs based on what they published and where they published. That remains pretty much true. I think maybe one of the few ways in which that has changed over the 10 years that BioArchive's been in existence is that people tell me now that they got their first academic job because they had a preprint on BioArchive and they might have been trying to get it published, but they had the interviews with the academic institution concerned based on their preprint and what could be perceived of the reactions to that preprint. Perceptions being, colored by Twitter and other things. So not really very much has changed. We're still very much bound up with published work, less so with conversations that take place around published work, whether it's on Twitter or on any other medium. And I think that in many ways is still a challenge for us with the scientific community more broadly. I happen to be lucky to be in a hub of scientific communication. I mean, the bar conversation that Patrick referred to that's alive and well. And it's one of the reasons why people go to meetings and they have those conversations because, science is a human enterprise and we learn a lot more by communicating face-to-face than we do through either the written word or the electronic word. So we're sort of groping towards progress here, but we're not there yet. And for the moment, published work remains the sort of talisman of talent and achievement, and most jobs are based in part on those things. I mean, the real appointment to a job is based on who you are and how you interact with the individuals on the ground. But getting to the point of being able to have that conversation is based very much on your output of knowledge and or output of science, and that typically means journals. Ludo, am I underestimating things here?
Well, I happen to live in a country in the Netherlands where we are making, the universities in the Netherlands are making a quite serious effort to actually move beyond the system that you're describing, John, with, I would say, kind of mixed success. Some universities or some departments are indeed actually quite successful in moving away from that system where kind of the publication, the journal article is kind of almost the only thing that counts. But at other places in the Netherlands, we see that this is more difficult. But looking at what is happening in the Netherlands, I'm actually relatively positive that it is possible to move beyond that type of system. But in response to Patrick and his engineers, I think so the way we value science, the way we value or evaluate researchers, scholars, that is something that, of course, the engineers cannot really change. But what I think is a big challenge for the engineers is basically coming up with ways to evaluate, or let's say to interact with scholarly work that go beyond this traditional idea of what peer review is. So we have this whole movement towards open peer review, which I fully support, which I believe is important and the way to go. But at the same time, we need to recognize that what is changing is the openness of the review. So rather than the reviews being closed, they are open, that's good. But actually, there are many other things that don't change in that particular transition. So we still have that idea like that the reviewer is going to review the entire article. And apparently the reviewer is kind of knowledgeable on all aspects of the article. And the reviewer is supposed to be motivated to give feedback, not just on a few issues that he kind of is most familiar with, but he is supposed to give feedback on all of it. And this, I think, is all quite a quite unnatural way, actually, of interacting with each other about particular scientific work. So when you're together at the bar, your conversation will converge towards the things where you kind of really have a shared interest. And peer review, also open peer review, has not yet managed to kind of move in the same direction. So sometimes I have this feeling like we should probably really kind of forget about that whole term peer review, because it has all these ideas that actually in some sense are obstacles to genuine interaction about scholarly work. And I think, Jonathan, when you mentioned the social media, I think that part of the answer is to be found there. The social media, with all their problems, they do provide something that apparently many of us feel is an attractive or an efficient way to interact with each other. And I think we need to learn from that. And perhaps we should even resist the temptation of building all kinds of communication channels for researchers next to what we already have on social media. Because I think no one likes to have too many different channels that you all need to pay attention to. So we should find a way, that's for your engineers, Patrick, to integrate it all. And I really don't know what that would actually entail, but it's something like that, I think.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It kind of reminds me again of what John was saying with eLife, where they're just kind of like passively aggregating content that's existing in many places on the internet to provide context for the article. So like one thing we actually truly believe, people should earn rewards for publishing open science. So everyone who publishes on BioArchive has some rewards waiting for them on ResearchHub, just because they published an open access, piece of scientific content. And so it's a challenging thing for the engineers for sure. We've tried to crawl Twitter before, but you're absolutely right, where assessment doesn't have to be in one place for it to matter. We should be making an effort to try and bring in everything from across the internet. And maybe even Google can turn on the microphones for us for those bar conversations, but that's mostly a joke. But yeah, absolutely, taking into account opinions from all across the internet.
One thing that I would like to add here is like when I heard you, John, talk about the traditional way that things are working right now, and if I translate that a little bit into a need, then I think what I think you're talking about is like a reputation mechanism. Like in a conversation, you start trusting a person that has expertise, right? Like you want to talk to a certain person about a certain issue because you know that they might be able to help you. Like I go with a book to my mathematics class. Can you translate this for me? I do. I don't understand the sign. And then they help me, and I know they have reputation because they are doing a PhD in math. So I trust their ability. And maybe that's something that why we had the journals in the first place, right? To like aggregate information of a certain type and be like, it's a reliable source of getting high quality information. So we keep going back to that. And now we are in this crisis sort of where we don't always know if it's really reliable, and that's a bit scary. And I think what we do need in the sense is like, and we have been working on that as a reputation algorithm to like keep track of who has what reputation, and for a decentralized system, that's actually something that in the whole DeSci space is kind of deep. It goes back to already the crypto anarchist manifesto, where the person writes that Timothy T. May, like a cypherpunk, writes that reputation is going to be really important once we have these crypto technologies, including currencies and including what is now the dark net. And there we see the same thing happen, that people need to trust complete strangers who are also criminals, but they still want to place an order, and then they develop a reputation system to build it. Maybe Patrick, you could talk a little bit about that and how you see that as part of the mission and part of the vision of ResearchHub.
Yeah, so to me, one of the really exciting things about what we're building is that it's kind of an infrastructure for the community to set their own rules. Like, you know, we have the situation today where bibliometrics kind of create these perverse incentives. And like if our team were to come up with like a reward and reputation structure, there's no doubt we would come up with similar perverse incentives, even with our like best efforts. And so I think it's important to have like modularity and the ability to iterate. So we actually have a computer scientist named Levy, who's kind of trying to come up with an algorithm in an open source fashion to convert real world scientific contributions like standard peer-reviewed publications, preprints, conference proceedings, peer reviews, basically anything that we can grab online and try and translate that into a reputation score on ResearchHub. So when you see a peer review, maybe there can be an anonymous peer review, but there's some sort of context of who's the person giving this, you know, critique of the work. But yeah, you know, a lot easier said than done. And again, I think it's very important for us to keep in mind that like it will be 100% wrong the first time. And the goal is like over time to make it more accurate and really like create incentives that like cause researchers to partake in good, healthy research behaviors that help us like get closer to the truth.
And then maybe here, an interesting thing is that what we have seen is that in a way now the reputation is always a dynamic system in a way, right? There's like bottom-up sort of reputation because where the people go, they give that reputation, but it right now is sort of also a top-down process because those people, those big journals which have a name, they decide who also gets to wield that power, right? By including them in the system. And in decentralized science, there's maybe a way to make that more bottom-up. And you were now talking already quite high level, but I feel one thing that is already baked into ResearchHub is like the upward downward mechanism, where the reader has some like some pushback against, or like some not that we need to always push back against authority, but that we have to some degree a counterbalance where there's also a bottom-up movement that gives reputation to the people who might already hold it, and it can take it away by downloading them. And I think that is an important dynamic that we need to build so that we can actually more easily discern between the high quality and the low quality stuff sooner. And it's sort of a way to like share reputation from scientist to scientist in a more dynamic way than in a static way where bots and higher organizational structures decide that.
Jonathan, could I ask you, are there examples of communities where that process is at work? And if so, what have been the consequences?
Yeah, I mean, one example that is basically ResearchHub's model is very similar to that of Reddit. And if you look in Reddit, it's like the front page of science was not of science, that's what ResearchHub is, but Reddit was the front page of the internet. That was their slogan. And when I started using it, actually the advantage was that because other people went through the internet and I felt that something was share worthy and then it was up and down voted, I had much quicker access to high quality content through this sort of ranking algorithm that they had applied to the content. And I think another one is maybe Google with their PageRank algorithm. By seeing the links between the different pages, they can at certain sort of they were looking at the users' behavior through an approximation or like an assessment of that, and then they can see, this is a relevant website because a lot of people want to see it. And in that way, the website builds reputation by having a lot of backlinks, right? And I think those would be examples of these systems. And I know Ludo has been citing research or like explaining research to me in one talk where he went into the PageRank algorithm that has been applied also in science. But I think we don't have that one thing yet, or like the trusted model, let's say, which is like Google in search, right? And science, it doesn't seem to yet exist. Maybe somebody wants to say something here, and then we can slowly go and answer some questions from the audience because we only have like 10 minutes left. But one more thing is, now that we have talked about all these positive things, I also want to look into like, what are some of the concerns? What are some of the challenges and maybe responsibilities that we have in the process of like promoting preprints, promoting open peer review? What should we maybe be careful about and watch out?
So just to add a tail end to your answer there, Jonathan, it kind of reminds me of something that I picked up from Ludo's talk last year, where like in the perfect situation, if everyone's publishing openly all the time, it's not realistic to expect that every piece of content would receive peer review, that we should probably be focusing limited peer review resources on the pieces of content that are most relevant to add context to. And so something that we're playing around with at ResearchHub is we have a Bioarchive hub where we're having people vote on Bioarchive preprints in order to like have some kind of additional context to like what are the preprints that people think deserve the most attention right now. And we're even going to automatically assign peer review bounties to these preprints, with kind of like the big picture idea being, if you come here and you vote, you can help direct attention of limited peer review resources to the preprints that you think the world needs to have that context on. So early stage, like nothing, to report that's exciting yet, but hopefully in a couple months, we'll have like the ability to have scientists share like where they think attention should be spent.
That's interesting, Patrick, and we'd certainly love to hear more about that when you're ready to share it. Yeah, we've been thinking about this, which is, I'm mindful that this may sound terribly arrogant because, let's face it, Bioarchive and MetaArchive represent at best, 10% of the literature at this point. So I shouldn't talk in terms of massive shifts in cultural awareness and behavior, but we obviously do talk a lot about whether every piece of scientific communication, once shared, is that enough? Is it necessary for everything to be peer reviewed? I think I'm also a journal publisher responsible for half a dozen journals, and peer review is in trouble because it's harder and harder to get qualified peer reviewers to agree to do the job. Now you could say we're not asking the right people. We don't, we're not broadly based enough in our peer review processes, which is a perfectly fair criticism. But there is a sense of weariness or resentment that if I'm a very, very busy scientist, then this is just another thing that I have to do with no obvious reward. And there's a sense that particularly younger scientists are not happy with that equation any longer. So I think we do have to rethink how peer review actually works. And one benefit of preprint servers is that they provide equal opportunity for dissemination, and then other things can be built on top of that. That's what we're interested in, various initiatives that are happening that are based on that premise, that you let everything out and then you filter. You don't filter and then let everything out that goes through the filter. So I think there are many reasons for why change is happening in the way that science communication is going, but fatigue and stress is one amongst the practitioners of science is one of those things.
Now, you want to say something?
Yeah, if it's okay, Jonathan. Oh, sorry, Patrick, go ahead.
I would have said, please say something.
Just to jump in, this is like one of my favorite quotes ever, and John just paraphrased it beautifully. It's from Linus Pauling, who says, like, the best way to get good ideas is to take lots of ideas and throw away the bad ones. So yeah, just it's 100% the ethos that we think the world needs.
I share all these ideas, and I also believe in this. And at the same time, I have a kind of a concern that I don't really know how to deal with it. I think all these ideas make a lot of sense to improve the way in which researchers communicate among each other. We can make the system much, much better. But there's, of course, also the communication between researchers, the research system, and society at large. And that's also where in my survey, where I think what is the reason why these people are so concerned about preprints not being reliable, all of that. Because societal actors may also read these preprints. And I think we can come up with all kinds of better ways of organizing communication in science between researchers. And this is really better ways of doing it. However, society is also kind of seeing all of this. And they, of course, they don't have the societal actors, most societal actors don't have the, let's say, the level of understanding of the way in which communication between researchers is organized to really kind of be able to properly assess what can be kind of trusted, what should be really taken with a grain of salt. And I wonder how we can also find a way to help societal actors to kind of properly make sense of what we are doing. And I don't have the answer to that.
It makes me think just like of, again, going back to the eLife aggregating everyone's opinion. Like, I think something that'd be very helpful, because there are, people who publish preprints and they're kind of trying to get to a certain answer. It's not like the most objective all the time, but that's just all science. It's really nice to have context. So like if X researcher thinks this is great, or X researcher thinks this is not great, that also could be shared alongside the news article that's trying to, elicit a certain opinion. And yeah, if we can, somehow encourage researcher X and Y to share their opinions, I think that's a good way of going about it, like kind of reputational association.
All right. Thank you all very much. In order to also give the audience a little bit of stake on this, I will shift to this. But first of all, thank you. I feel like I could talk to you for longer. This has been really fun. I like how you guys also had a dynamic between, at one point, Ludo was just asking you questions, John, and that's, I think, exactly what we need. Like in science and in general, apparently in human endeavors, the conversation and coming to one idea is very powerful. That does not always mean that when you start that you have the same opinion, but talking about the same topic can be powerful, right? And I really enjoy this. So now I want to also that the viewers participate, because they probably also feel the same. And maybe take one or two questions from the audience and maybe go a little bit over time here with this. So one question I find interesting is that are there any plans to add some review capabilities on the preprint servers to help address some of the accuracy issues? For example, either some automatic or in-person reviews on the data analysis.
Well, we have many of those things happening now. It may be a testament to our failure to make that obvious that the questioner is unaware of that, and we are sort of rethinking our interface. But there is a dashboard on every bioarchive preprint, and it provides a focus of comment activity around that particular, various kinds of activities around that preprint, and clicking on that device underneath every abstract will open up a dashboard in which you can see in some detail different kinds of community-based reaction to that particular preprint. That may include peer review, but it also includes all kinds of other forms of engagement with the work concerned. So that's not to say that every preprint attracts that kind of activity, and that's something else that we need to work on to try to engage the community more widely in thinking about and reacting to the existence of a preprint, because that contribution is immensely valuable. But we have work to do on changing, increasing enthusiasm for engagement in that way.
Okay, then I have another one for you, Ludo, I guess. Ludo made such a great point about the assumption that any given peer reviewer is an expert on an entire paper. Do you see a future in science where peer review can be more discretized, where peer reviewers assess only individual aspects of the preprint that matches their expertise, e.g. specific techniques? Yeah, what do you have to say?
Yeah, yeah, I think this reminds me of and some of the participants may be familiar with these developments. There are now these platforms like Research Equals, and in the UK there's Octopus. These platforms that actually enable researchers to publish their work in smaller units. So rather than an entire article, you publish, for instance, a description of a method, a description of a data set, just a few results. And then the peer review can also take place at the level of these smaller units. Theoretically speaking, this to me sounds actually quite nice, but I must also admit that I, for instance, myself in my own work, I have not yet kind of started to adopt these approaches. So it seems to be there's a big hurdle there. The other thing is, I think actually in some sense, this thing of commenting on individual aspects of a preprint, it's actually happening a lot on social media. There people do it. So we have it, but it's completely different from what we normally consider to be peer review. So perhaps we should be happy actually with what the social media enable us to do, because there's a lot of valuable discussion going on there.
Yeah, I would add also that there is an organization called Hypothesis, which has developed annotation software, which if you sign into Hypothesis and then look at, say, preprints on BioArchive or medRxiv, then you can see what people have added, annotations essentially, not peer review as we understand it, but annotations at particular points in a manuscript. That uptake, I think, has been faster in the social sciences than in the hard sciences. But it is an interesting technology, and we are working with the folks at Hypothesis on elaborations of that.
Nice, thank you. Yeah, then I have one last question, and we can then wrap it up. So it says, the White House will require all federally funded research to be released to the public for free by 2026. How do you think that changes the publishing scenario?
Typically, that directive, if it's risen to the level of a directive yet, that is talked about in the context of open access journal publishing. It does not as far as I'm aware, mean that we're going to get the US federal government telling everybody that they have to post preprints. We would like that. It doesn't seem to be the case. But hopefully that will encourage this sense of sharing that we have seen grow in 10 years of BioArchive, and will make people feel more comfortable with the whole idea that they should they should share their work in venues which are open, essentially, whether it's a journal or whether it's a preprint server.
Anyone else here has a comment on this?
I think it's interesting to see the kind of parallel developments in Europe. So what's happening in the US is important and interesting, at least if it goes on. But in Europe, we are going, and partly we have already gone through similar types of processes. And I think what we now see in Europe is we see that at the political level, we have the European countries and the EU Council, they make actually quite strong statements pushing for change in how we do publishing, actually stronger statements, I would say, than what's happening in the US. And there's now also, for instance, the funders, the Coalition S funders, that are going to work on a new strategy, what they call responsible publishing, where I think we can also really expect to see some interesting developments. Coalition S, the European Commission, Open Research Europe, it's kind of all moving in a direction that where kind of preprinting, open peer review are going to be key ingredients of how publishing is supposed to be done. So that's, I think, really exciting.
Yeah, thank you all for this amazing. I still on my head, I have some questions. I would like to know more about BioArchive and the specific disciplines, more about hypotheses. Where are they actually talking right now?
You know where to find me, Jonathan. Happy to.
Yeah, we have to continue this, like, honestly. Good. And then maybe the other thing, whether someone might is like the financial aspect of it all, like just with the last question that came to mind, is also important. Yeah, so let's continue the conversation, and thank you all for this deep sharing of information that actually made me inspired and yeah, kept the conversation going. So see you all on another occasion. Maybe we can host again another call.
Thank you for the opportunity. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.